Breaking security alert. We interrupt all regular programming for an urgent, catastrophic intelligence report emanating from the highest corridors of Windsor Castle. Reports are flooding in of an unprecedented breach of sovereign protocol, a silent coup unfolding behind locked iron doors, where the sacred seal of the realm's future king has been seized in an unholy bid for absolute power. This is not a mere family rift. This is an existential siege upon the thousand-year-old machinery of the British crown. Deep within the secluded, shadow-draped quarters of Windsor Castle, King Charles stood frozen, staring down at a document carrying the force of an unthinkable betrayal. He had prepared himself for another cold, difficult message from his exiled younger son. What the sovereign was never prepared to witness was the sacred, inviolable title of the Prince of Wales, placed beneath an order that the true heir had never signed, never seen, and never approved. Within minutes, a routine security alert erupted into a royal emergency, signaling that the structural integrity of the monarchy was fracturing from within. Outside the heavily fortified, rain-slicked entrance of the castle, Prince Harry stood waiting in the cold gloom. He did not arrive as a quiet penitent seeking reconciliation. He arrived demanding immediate access to a confidential strategy summit where the future division of royal duties was being decided. And the authority he presented to the trembling security officers did not bear his own fallen name. It appeared to originate directly from the office of the future King of England. When Charles read the final line of that hijacked directive, a suffocating silence fell over the room. Before we plunge deeper into what this terrifying breach really means for the survival of the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss a single update on this historical power shift. The anger rose within the monarch's chest like a dark tide before anyone in the room dared to speak. The Windsor meeting had been arranged in total secrecy to divide future duties and shield the crown from confusion at its most fragile moment. The title of the Prince of Wales was not a mere honorific. It identified the direct heir to the throne. Utilizing that title on an instruction could deceive palace staff and security officers into believing the future king had personally approved Harry's return. Harry possessed no invitation. Every footstep onto these sovereign grounds required confirmation through the royal household, the staff structure managing palace business. Yet here was the rogue prince, brandishing an authorization asserting that he was entering on behalf of the Prince of Wales. William had signed nothing. William had sent no message. William had no idea his brother was approaching Windsor. The king's knuckles turned bone white as his fingers gripped the table. His voice sliced through the stagnant air. "Who gave him permission to use my son's name?"
No one answered. Harry had arrived wrapped in borrowed majesty, wielding stolen authority like a weapon aimed at the succession. Outside the locked gate, Harry refused to retreat. He told the security officer that his family could not exclude him forever, insisting William's position should protect him, not become another stone wall built against him. The officer remained unyielding, but the younger prince's voice hardened as he forced an escalation. Inside, his sovereign father understood the grim reality. This was no longer a request for entry, but a direct challenge to the crown. Prince William entered the room later and examined the disputed order in absolute silence. Under the harsh light, the direct heir recognized phrases from an older internal communication used during a private attempt to arrange contact between the estranged brothers. Someone had copied that wording carefully enough to make the authorization look authentic. William's expression shifted from confusion to sheer disbelief. A private promise had been turned into an official command. Charles ordered the gates kept closed. He instructed staff to trace every copied phrase and person connected to the document before Harry spoke with anyone inside. Then the first discovery made the crisis personal. Harry had relied on a promise made months earlier, one William believed had already been withdrawn. As Charles demanded immediate answers and Harry remained stranded outside the iron gates, the crisis stopped being a question of entry and became something far more painful. Which brother believed he had been betrayed first? Behind the fury stood three men carrying three very different wounds. Charles saw a constitutional danger threatening the monarchy. William saw his authority taken without consent. Harry saw a final door closing in his face. None believed he was the true aggressor. Yet only one title had been misused, and only one sovereign man would be forced to decide whether blood still deserved protection. Charles had spent decades trying to perform an impossible balancing act, separating the fragile heart of a father from the unyielding weight of the monarch. Yet every desperate appeal from Harry pulled those two identities violently back together,
forcing the king into an agonizing corridor where private love was constantly sacrificed on the altar of public duty. But this time, the threat went beyond personal heartbreak. The title of the Prince of Wales was no ornamental luxury. It was the sacred key to the succession. An instruction issued in that name carried immediate institutional force. It could alter security perimeters, manipulate high-level schedules, and compel the unquestioning obedience of palace staff. To allow its unauthorized use, even once, was to invite absolute chaos into the sovereign apparatus. In an adjoining study, Prince William sat alone. The shadowed room felt suffocating, dominated by the single sheet of copied paper resting on the polished oak before him. The future king read every phrase again and again, searching for some innocent mistake, some desperate miscommunication. But the wording was far too precise, too chillingly calculated. Harry knew which exact expressions would make an order sound authentic to castle guards. The future king slowly turned the paper face down, his jaw tight with quiet fury. His brother had not simply asked for help or pleaded for an audience. He had seized the institutional authority William had spent a lifetime learning to carry, transforming a sacred birthright into an instrument of leverage. Meanwhile, Harry waited under heavy guard in a secured reception room, having been forcibly moved away from the castle gates. The sudden rush of anger that had sustained him at the perimeter was beginning to give way to a cold, creeping shock. He insisted to a stone-faced protection officer that he had not stolen power, that he was merely acting upon a solemn promise William had once made to him. The officer offered no reply, leaving the exiled prince isolated in the quiet chamber with the terrifying realization that the promise he clung to no longer existed. Inside the command center, Charles received the first digital fragments of archived communications detailing past discussions of a private meeting between the brothers. The messages granted no authorization for entry, yet when spliced together in a specific sequence, they created the uncanny illusion that the Prince of Wales was expecting his brother. The king saw the terrifying brilliance of the deception. A private family exchange had been surgically reconstructed into something palace staff would mistake for an official royal command. Faced with the evidence, William finally admitted the painful backstory to his father. Months earlier, he had offered Harry a confidential, off-the-record conversation at Windsor under strict conditions. No press releases, no hidden recording devices, and no official palace announcements. It was meant to be a final, desperate chance to heal as brothers, away from the eyes of the world. But that invitation dissolved into dust the moment confidential details from a separate exchange leaked directly to external media networks. King Charles entered his elder son's private quarters without a single advisor present. Standing before the future monarch, the king asked directly whether any part of Harry's claim could be defended. William looked down at the face-down authorization, then met his father's eyes with icy clarity. "Not the part where he used my title," he replied. That single answer settled the immediate institutional crisis, but it reopened a deep, festering wound, returning them both to the night Harry was explicitly warned never to invoke William's office again. Months before the gates of Windsor were sealed, William had extended that final private lifeline. There were no cameras, no legal aids, no official transcripts, just two brothers in a small room confronting years of silence and public warfare. Charles had pushed for that meeting because he recognized that the feud was no longer merely personal. It threatened the stability of the monarchy itself. William had agreed, but only on one unyielding condition. The discussion must remain utterly separate from official palace business. He attended as a brother, not as the Prince of Wales. Yet the moment they sat down, Harry demanded far more than brotherly affection. He demanded that the future king restore his official security clearance, guarantee him a permanent royal role, and overrule the high-ranking household staff who had blocked his previous demands. The atmosphere turned instantly hostile. William pushed his chair back, warning Harry that affection could never be converted into official power, and strictly forbidding him from ever using their private relationship as proof of royal authorization. Harry had responded with years of accumulated rage, accusing William of hiding behind protocol and using palace bureaucracy as a shield to lock him out. But William remained firm, stating that protocol was the only thing protecting the crown from becoming a weapon in their private war. When Harry left that night, he surreptitiously retained a printed scheduling note bearing the official header of William's office. Months later,
That single piece of paper would become the blueprint for the fake authorization presented at Windsor. William had opened the door that night with a final warning. "You may speak to me as my brother. You may never speak for me as the heir." Now, that warning had been blatantly defied. Charles ordered Harry brought into the inner sanctum, not as a returning prince, but as a son summoned to answer for crossing the one boundary that could never be forgiven. When Harry was finally escorted into the secluded private room deep within Windsor, no one offered a greeting. The heavy oak door clicked shut with the absolute finality of a prison vault. King Charles stood motionless behind a small wooden table, his face carved from cold stone. Prince William remained near the rain-streaked window, his silhouette dark, tense, and unyielding against the gray sky. Between them lay the disputed authorization, a single piece of paper waiting like damning evidence at a high treason trial. There were no legal aides present to soften the brutal edges of the confrontation, no public relations handlers to maintain appearances, and no cameras to compel restraint. Harry had been admitted inside only after surrendering his mobile device to royal protection officers and accepting one non-negotiable condition. The meeting promised no restored access, no official duties, no status, and no future negotiations. Charles had deliberately chosen a small private room instead of a sweeping formal state chamber because he desperately wanted his son to answer as family before the matter escalated into an official disciplinary decision, a formal sanction carrying lasting, catastrophic consequences for royal access and conduct. The king picked up the paper, his hands remarkably steady, and laid it directly in front of Harry. His voice was low, laced with terrifying authority, as he asked whether his younger son had knowingly approved the use of William's title. Harry stood tall, refusing to bow his head, though a faint tremor marked his jaw. He did not deny it. Instead, he claimed that the Prince of Wales had once promised him a private path back into the fold, contending that he had merely acted upon a door that had already been left unlocked. Charles struck his palm flat against the table. The sharp, violent sound shattered the silence and ended every remaining excuse. He declared that a brother's invitation could never become an order from the heir. The sovereign's fury was absolute, stemming from far more than a broken rule. He saw private love being reshaped into public power, knowing that allowing such a violation once would permanently weaken every future command issued in William's name. William finally turned toward his brother, his eyes burning with cold contempt. He accused Harry of taking one isolated moment of family compassion and rebuilding it as stolen authority. The future king reminded him that the old invitation had strict conditions, firm limits, and zero connection to official palace operations. Harry answered with years of suppressed rage, declaring that compassion without action was only another form of rejection. He insisted William had offered hope, then hidden behind the office of the heir when that hope became politically inconvenient. Then came the critical confession. In a recorded account made during the confrontation, Harry revealed how the order had been created. He admitted that a former intermediary familiar with palace correspondence had reconstructed the format. That helper understood how royal messages were arranged, calculating that palace staff would instinctively obey the prestigious title before ever questioning its source. Charles removed his glasses and placed them beside the document. "Give me the name," the king demanded. Harry refused, claiming that exposing the individual would destroy the last connection still willing to help him return. The king's voice dropped to a quiet whisper. He warned Harry that silence would now count as another explicit choice against the family. At the bottom of the page sat a reference number tied to a dormant office account, an old royal system that should have been disabled years ago. Harry's confession exposed the deep emotional betrayal, but the forgotten account revealed something far more dangerous. The attempt had reached deeper into the royal system than anyone first understood. Within the monarchy, a title only holds power when recognized by those entrusted to act upon it. As sovereign holding highest household authority, Charles had to determine whether his son had merely imitated power or whether someone inside the royal machinery had opened a hidden channel. William felt the violation personally, emphasizing that private forgiveness meant nothing if the office of the heir could be copied and manipulated. He was protecting a chain of authority that staff depended upon during security decisions and emergencies. Charles hesitated before ordering a full internal search, fearing it might expose buried loyalties and private channels he had preserved out of love. Sitting beside his senior private secretary as the archived log history appeared on a secure screen, Charles closed his eyes in grief. The reference number belonged to a transitional account used during a household restructuring.
A former administrative contractor had contacted Harry's intermediary 3 days before the attempted entry to refine the wording. Charles issued an immediate directive disabling every dormant account and suspending all informal communication routes linked to Harry. Harry watched in disbelief as his final private passage vanished. Harry stood before his father in the suffocating stillness of the room, his voice stripped of its earlier fury as he pleaded for 10 minutes alone. But King Charles remained unyielding, refusing to grant a private audience while his son continued to protect the shadowy intermediary who had engineered the illicit misuse of the heir's title. Desperate and visibly shaken, the Duke reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded, crumpled letter. For several agonizing seconds he held it out, his hand trembling violently under the cold glow of the chandelier, asking if his father intended to read his true words at all. The sovereign answered with quiet, crushing finality. The letter would be accepted only through formal institutional channels. For the first time in history, a son's private appeal to his father was subjected to the cold, bureaucratic machinery of state policy. Defeated, Harry finally disclosed the identity of the intermediary, a former staff member once close enough to William's household to understand the arcane formatting of royal directives. A security officer opened the heavy door. Harry stepped across the threshold, and the lock engaged behind him with an icy metallic snap. William remained motionless near the window, offering no farewell, no gesture, and no backward glance. Late that evening, long after the advisors, legal counsels, and private secretaries had departed, King Charles returned to the silent room where the confrontation had taken place. There, left abandoned upon the polished table, lay Harry's folded letter. The monarch did not read it alone. In the quiet hours before dawn, he summoned Prince William. Without aids or recording devices, father and son unfolded the single page together. Reading the letter would not reverse the institutional banishment, but it served as a painful personal reckoning. As Charles read the words aloud, the true depth of Harry's desperation was laid bare. He admitted that he had seized William's title because he believed an appeal bearing only his own disgraced name would be discarded unheard. The letter did not defend the betrayal. It exposed a terrifying fear, that Harry believed he had become so utterly powerless within his own family that only borrowed majesty could force them to listen. William listened in grim silence, deeply perturbed by his brother's profound sense of isolation, yet resolute that personal desperation could never justify weaponizing the succession. By dawn, the private family tragedy had transformed into a public storm that shook the foundations of the monarchy. Though the crisis had played out behind stone walls, its consequences reached the public before breakfast. The palace issued an unprecedented, coldly calibrated statement confirming that an unauthorized access request utilizing the Prince of Wales designation had been intercepted and rejected, while security protocols were permanently hardened across all royal estates. The public fallout was immediate. Front pages across the nation displayed the locked iron gates of Windsor under screaming headlines, "Not in my name." Television commentators dissecting the breach coined a phrase that echoed across global broadcasts. Harry did not merely knock on the family door, he arrived carrying William's key. Sympathy flickered briefly when briefings confirmed Harry had sought a private reconciliation rather than restored official duties, but the methodology was condemned as unforgivable. Charles refused demands for a public condemnation of his son, keeping his fatherly mercy private while maintaining his unyielding duty to the crown. In the final act of this quiet tragedy, sovereign authority rendered its absolute verdict. King Charles signed a formal directive invalidating the Windsor Order, barring the intermediary permanently, and shuttering every dormant communication channel that had ever linked Harry to the palace. Yet beneath the cold legal decree, the father added a handwritten note meant for his son's eyes alone. He wrote that the bond between parent and child had not been permanently severed, that a private conversation could still take place, but only after Harry accepted total responsibility and acknowledged the profound harm done to William. William agreed not to block a future personal meeting, provided the office of the heir remained protected. Harry signed the formal acknowledgement, relinquishing forever any claim to palace language, royal titles, or informal backchannels. Alone in exile, holding the official rejection in one hand and his father's handwritten note in the other, Harry finally confronted the fatal reality of his new existence. He had not been erased as a son, but he had lost his power as a prince. The gates remained closed, the succession stood protected, and the ancient crown rolled onward, unbending and indifferent. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next update.